As a landlord, your primary interest is in making a profit, and this cannot be done successfully if rents are not received in a timely manner. Collecting rent on time can be a nightmare if you don't have a strategy and clear expectations of the tenants. Here are some tips for regular and efficient rent collection. Have a clear policy on rent payments. Where to make the rent payment, when the rent is due, and who the rent is payable to. Also, share the policy on the collection of late rents. Rent expectations should be communicated to the tenant in the lease agreement. Never assume the tenant will know where, when, or how to pay the rent. You should communicate expectations often and in different mediums. Communication could include what address any non-cash payments should be sent to and when they must be received by. How to pay rent in cash if you accept cash. Who the check is made payable to. What to do and who to contact if the rent will be late. What happens if a check is returned by the bank regardless of reason. Collect rent on the first of the month or whichever date it is due. If you do not have a rent payment in hand for the first of the month, then knock on the door and ask for the rent. If the tenant is not home when you try and collect the rent, ensure you leave a standard collection notice under their door or in their mailbox so they know you were here and how they can resolve the outstanding rent issue. Also, inform the tenant of any late fees or penalties they may be subjected to as you enforce the collection of rent. Of course, everything you do should be sanctioned by applicable legislation. Take postdated checks, if the tenant offers them. Be aware that some landlord-tenant legislation does not permit the landlord to demand postdated checks. However, if a tenant offers postdated checks, you can certainly accept them. Collecting outstanding rent matters. If the rent is not paid, call to remind the tenant of their obligation until a satisfactory resolution can be arranged. If the tenant indicates they will have the rent for the 5th of the month, set up a time and a place to meet to collect the rent on the 5th. If the tenant does not pay the rent on the 1st or on the agreed amount date, ensure you take all applicable legal action to ensure the collection of rent. Don't delay. Rent matters. Never make deductions from the rent. If you've hired a tenant to do a job around the building, such as cutting the grass or shoveling the snow, pay them instead of having it deducted from the rent payment. If you have allowed a tenant to do a repair at your cost and said you would reimburse them for the expense, pay them instead of deducting it from the rent. This way, you can always tell if the rent is paid in full, and you are in control of what expenses you pay. Use a collection agency if needed. If you have difficulty following up with late payments or tend to side with a good hard luck story, hire someone to collect the rent for you. Use legal means to collect rent if necessary. While it may be expensive to file with the tribunal or court and take a day off work to appear at a hearing, it may be warranted to collect outstanding rent. This is especially true if the tenant has already vacated the rental premises and there is no salvaging the rental relationship. Once you receive judgment for the outstanding balance, you have the opportunity to collect in many ways. Collection measures, including putting a lien on their assets, such as a car and or a garnishment of wages, is one method to collect outstanding rent. Don't be afraid to collect what is rightfully yours. However, one must remember the business relationship and not fall into petty squabbles. Establishing yourself as a professional, responsible, and considerate business person will set the stage to reap long-term benefits. Business integrity and values and ethical business conduct are the key drivers of success.